Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm a social studies educator, historian, and host of this, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm also an avid collector of popular culture artifacts. I love what I find at thrift store outlets, garage sale leftovers, and what I spot just making my way around the built world. I enjoy sorting through boxes of free books and magazines, not to mention online collections like Internet Archive, and of course the Library of Congress. But you don't need to spend your time digging through bins or following online rabbit holes to get a look into the past. The movies and TV we watch, the books we read, and the games we play are all documents of the past. So is fashion, food, music, toys, even the roads we travel on and the places we live and work in. Everything is a primary source. This podcast is the result of exhibiting these kinds of artifacts in public, getting passersby to select an item they connect with, and then chatting with me to see what it says about the time, place, and people who made it. The conversation you are about to hear, therefore, is your history, my history, our history, through popular culture. Marcus, it's so much fun having you in my class again.
Yeah.
So we just ran into each other. We're at UNH right now, and I was in the dining hall, and I got Mr. Salmonson, and we met up. And this recording will demonstrate that the Everything is a Primary Source method has some applications. It's not theoretical. So. Mm-hmm. Be honest, did you get sick and tired of that form when you were filling it out in my class?
Yes.
You did? All right.
I did, but I still found it useful.
I sometimes refer to it as the ruiner of pop culture because when you are like me and every piece of media I enjoy now, I'm always dissecting it and be like, why was it made? Mm-hmm. When was it? What does it tell me about the time period and everything like that? I know that there's some trade-offs when it comes to using it so much, but mm-hmm. I'm glad that you are here and that you kind of snuck into this conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're all very friendly people, so I'm glad to take the time. So tell me about why did you choose what you did, the Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald?
I think I chose it mostly because it was one of the few ones that I recognized, and I felt like I could talk the most about it.
Okay.
And I don't know, just as soon as I saw it, I knew that this was what I wanted to talk about, and I can't really explain why. It's just a feeling that I got.
It's a story that, and I think we can just launch right into it. As far as it's familiar to high school students, and has been for the better part of it. It's almost a 100-year-old story now. It's crazy to think that. I think it might have turned 100 years this year, 24. I think
so.
Somewhere around there. But it's closing in on that, mm-hmm. and it's like a pretty standard, it's an update on the Count of Monte Cristo type story of redemption and mm-hmm.
wearing
masks and, like the themes that I think most high school curriculums want students to ponder.
Yeah.
And it's delivered in this really great, pretty exciting story way that is almost timeless. There's mm-hmm. relatability with the characters, and I think most importantly, and what we're definitely seeing with this particular copy, it's very cheap and easy for publishers to produce. So the copy that you have, and you said you have a couple at home mm-hmm. In your possession, they all have different covers.
Yeah.
I think most people are familiar with the original cover art, the Celestial Eyes one.
Yeah.
What are we looking at with this particular one?
This one has a gray background with a mint and a white stripe in the middle with the title of the book on it.
And really the only thing from the story that's hinted at on the cover would be the green.
Yes, and the light at the end of the dock.
Yeah, and otherwise it seems like a pretty low-cost way to produce this book.
Yeah.
Right? Like none of the other themes, it almost looks like the gray almost has like a I know it's not, but it almost gives it like the grains of a piece of wood or something. It doesn't seem to be relevant at all to any of the story. It looks like they're just mass producing this thing in large quantities. And if you don't mind me asking, what is the publisher of that particular one?
The Scribner Library.
And I think it's from the 50s, right?
Yeah, 53.
So why do you think, we'll go to that question, why do you think that this was published in the time period or at all? This is obviously a mass-produced, Great Gatsby. It's like probably the 10th printing of the book. Why do you think that this has been renewed over and over again as a story?
Oh, geez. Well, everyone always says it's a classic, right? So I think that's one reason. It's just one of those books that you can read after, like 100 years, and it still has meaning in the current time period, and people can still find a connection to it in some way, even if it's no more deep than it's just an entertaining book. I think with the cover art being so plain as it is, we can, what I think is that it might have been mass-produced for schools as a cheap resource to educate the kids.
So what does that tell us about schools, the school experience, say, in the post-World War II era, the 1950s, that you have, in this case, the Scribner Company with this, and it might be part of the reason why it's considered a classic is because they keep putting it out there. Another comparison would be the To Kill a Mockingbird. That book was originally published in paperback. It was never published hardcover, and that's why it's become so well known. Did you read that one in school too?
No, we never got to that one.
That one is frequently included into curriculum not because it's necessarily, it is a great story, but it's because it was affordable to schools. So what does that tell us about public education in this case, the 1950s, that there are companies satisfying this, you need X amount of class sets of The Great Gatsby. We can do that for you. It's going to be, low cost. Why would they need so many books? What does that tell us about high school after World War II?
Probably, I know that America began to value education more after World War II. And I think also with the post-war, the Cold War starting with the Soviet Union, promoting American ideas in schools for a low cost is a great idea. And it's really a uniquely American story that doesn't really apply to a ton of other cultures. So it could... I don't really know how to say this.
No, I think you're saying it right on the spot. That it is what it is, and I hate that saying, but it is, it could have been published in the 20s and just included itself. F. Scott Fitzgerald isn't really known for much else besides The Great Gatsby, and he did other stuff. He even wrote screenplays for movies and stuff, but this is the book, and it's because he hit that sweet spot of Americana, right? There's not, and despite the actual real-time story taking place entirely within probably like a 20-mile radius of New York City, there's references to Chicago, there's references to Kentucky, there's references to Europe, so it is actually a pretty, it covers that World War I generation experience really nicely. And that in itself for Americans was a unique to us type thing. So I love what you're dissecting here. This is just perfect. Schools were getting bigger after World War II, weren't they? Because of that value in education. Can you think of any other examples that either involving this book or, one of the questions I was thinking while you were talking, and of course I was listening to you, but what you were saying was bring this to me. There's several film versions of this book. I think the most recent one is the Leonardo DiCaprio one.
Yes.
Do you think those are products of this thing being mass produced and read by every single teenager in America for the last 100 years? Or do you think that those films are part of the reason why it has that status of being a classic?
I think that the films definitely add to the legacy of the book, but also every time that they make a movie, there's got to be a reason for it culturally that they think it would be relevant to put this out there, because movies it's a business. You want to make money, right? So,
and they too are primary sources of their times.
Each different version of the movie.
Right.
I've only seen the Leonardo DiCaprio one, but there's a couple other ones.
Yeah, there's the Robert Redford. He plays Gatsby in 1971, early 70s. And that's the one that when I was in high school, we would watch while we were reading the book. And every teacher has their own approach to it. Sometimes they'll read the whole thing first and then watch the movie for compare and contrast reasons. If I remember correctly, I think we were doing both simultaneously because, you know, you can trace The Great Gatsby chapter by chapter. And those of us who have read it several times, you can refer to it, well, of course, chapter 4. You know, like, oh, yeah, chapter 4. You know, everyone knows it. And so the film versions, the most recent one kind of diverts a little bit from that. But overall, you know, because they do the whole thing where Nick is in a mental institution at the beginning. And, you know, we're always to assume he is the author because it's from his perspective that we actually see him given the task of writing The Great Gatsby by the doctor or whatever. Whereas the one I'm thinking of, the Robert Redford one, where Sam Waterston plays Nick, it just starts off with those famous words, in my younger and more, you know, that's how it begins. And you see him on the way to visiting Daisy across the harbor. And it's like, those things, it's almost like the filmmakers were like, we want to supplement the American classroom, right? We were making this film in part so that students can go and, you know, involve their better understanding of this entire story by having the visuals and stuff like that. Which then doubles down on your theory of like, education is really important. It's an all hands on deck experience after World War II, where we're making other media to support what's going on in the classroom. Any other thoughts? I mean, when you were reading all these books in high school, were there anything similar to The Great Gatsby in that kind of pattern?
Just off the top of my head, and this was, a couple years ago now, there's nothing I can think of that was as big of an icon as The Great Gatsby had turned into all these different movie adaptations. There were books that I liked, for sure, but none that I think are as timeless and relevant as The Great Gatsby in all its iteration, almost 100 years of publishing. So I think it's really unique in that way.
And I would say the publication that we have here, obviously I reference it a lot when I do my teaching in my classes, like the one you were in, and I always ask the students, have you read The Great Gatsby yet? In 11th grade, you probably will be, if you haven't already. It's because it is everything about it, from the story itself to then the marketing for the book and the way that the cover art is, and sort of F. Scott Fitzgerald's own rise to celebrity status, being part of that expatriate, lost generation himself. Everything about it is a gestation of the time period. It's of that post-World War I era. And post-World War I is so comparable to other time periods. So this thing comes from post-World War II. So it gives students the opportunity to kind of connect with their peers across 30-year span, which are probably their parents or their grandparents by that point, and be like, all right, I'm learning about their youth, and the way that they were experiencing post-war America and what all of that factored into it. Because, yeah, World War I is actually a pretty important part of The Great Gatsby. I mean, that's what changes Jay Gatsby's life, and makes him, come back and be able to, kind of white lie his way through. Yeah, I'm an Oxford man, and, all that business. So it's absolutely every iteration, whether it be another copy of the book. I think. Have you ever seen the graphic novel version of The Great Gatsby?
I saw one. I think I have the first piece of it. I see them in comic book stores.
Yeah. And it's like that's like the new way of communicating stories now is graphic novels. It's finally become accepted reading material even in academic settings of like, you can read the graphic novel. It's fine. So it's like all the versions of the book, whether it be in book form or in movie form. I wouldn't be surprised if we dug a little bit. We could probably find like a radio drama version of it. It's possible.
Yeah.
They made a movie. The original Great Gatsby movie came out the year after the book did.
Really?
In true Great Gatsby fashion, they're like, let's cash in on this thing right now. Yeah. But it's been all but lost, like a lot of movies from that era. I think somebody threw it in a fire or something. Like, whoops, that was a movie. But you can't find any copies of it anymore. But it's like that. It carries with it so many different stories. And yes, every time it's resuscitated, revived, reprinted, there's a reason behind it. And I think you just tapped on it perfectly. So I get to say, yes, my lessons worked, and I ruined yet another piece of pop culture. Thanks for taking part in this. I really appreciate it. And I love these kinds of just running into each other, and how it produces, in this case, another entry into the archives. Yeah. Thanks again. So I have Andrew here at the AEE conference being held at your home campus of the University of New Hampshire. Yes. And you were telling me that you grew up around here, so I assume that you visited the campus a few times throughout your life. And did you say when you were growing up, like, this is the perfect fit for me?
So I actually came from a very large family of 11, so I have 8 siblings, and we've all done Air National Guard straight into UNH because it pays for a state school. And so it was one of those. It was very local. I really was interested in the outdoor leadership and management major, and also the military was like, hey, we'll pay for your education at a state school. So I was like, well,
those things right there kind of fit into my overall thesis of everything being a primary source, because we live close to an Air Force base.
Yep, Pease.
And that actually, I grew up on Pease in the 80s when it was a full active duty military facility. But if you lived really any further away, that probably would not have entered your mind as far as an option.
Yes.
Right, to go Air National Guard. Thank you for your service. And then having UNH here with with a companion program, or just the idea of turning to the military for funds to go to school. I mean, that's a very post-World War II. So time and place is very much relevant in what we just said. And I would like to use this opportunity to further confirm what my guest just previous to you had brought up when we talked about The Great Gatsby, which is going to be our topic, in that it has become a teaching tool for high school students more or less in the same span of time. I don't have a lot of evidence of if it went from being popular reading material in the 20s to high schools within a couple of years. But I'm certain after World War II, that book has become standard reading material in high school. And so that's when you first encountered it, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I first encountered it, I don't know how long ago.
Probably 11th grade?
Yeah, so I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago. I think I first read it freshman in high school, and it was in a homeschool English teacher's classroom. She went to school and got her master's in education and loved teaching and writing so much that she started like a non-profit like homeschool group to teach homeschool families. So I was homeschooled growing up.
There's another product of the times, right?
Yes. And so basically that's when I first read it. But yeah, and I've read it a few times after that as well.
You might have had a different experience than some of your peers with this book. So, I mean, because I think the copy that we're looking at right now is, when we dissected this just a little while ago with my former student, we recognized that the reason why it's published the way it is, very, monochromatic cover, very, affordable to print, lots of them, was a response to the growing marketplace of gigantic public schools.
Yes.
That, schools would order probably 10 class sets of those because they needed to educate all those kids all at one time, and you're bound to lose a couple copies or have them ruined, so you might as well get lots of them at the same time. Whereas what you're saying is that you probably only had your teacher, like, did everybody in your consortium have a different copy of The Great Gatsby? Do you remember? Or was it all the same?
It was all different copies. So we were tasked with either going to our local library to find a copy if we didn't already have one, order a copy. Back then, Amazon wasn't prominent, from what I can remember. At least it wasn't utilized in my family very much, and so it was either going to the local library or asking a friend, or just ordering it off the homeschool website that we use to get our books from.
And it was probably like a collaborative, kind of listserv type thing of people helping each other out to get these books. And it's like, what you're saying, and we haven't even talked about the book at all yet, really, but it's just like that kind of fragmentation of education.
Yeah.
But at the time that this book was written, that represents some of the school experiences as well, that the country in the 1920s was very divided, urban versus rural, like the two Americas were. And in urban areas, that's where you'd be more likely to find high schools that would resemble what we have.
What we see nowadays.
But in the rural areas, it was hit or miss. Some rural areas still had, into the early 20th century, one-room schoolhouses, which is, I think in a lot of these, the homeschool organizations that you're describing are kind of the modern version of the, because not everybody's the exact same age or grade level, right? It's all different.
Yeah. And I had a very unique homeschool experience where I had 8 siblings, and so we would do a lot of things at home, and it was all a very different variety of age levels from 12th grade to pre-K. So there's a 14-year age gap from the youngest to the oldest, and my mother, bless her heart, but she homeschooled all of us. And we did some online, some books. We had different groups, different co-ops that we spent with other homeschool families. And specifically when I read The Great Gatsby, it was through a local operation of a collaborative of homeschool families that said, hey, we have, high school students that want to get a good, firm understanding of English and just literature and writing. And so this was like a pre-college course. So from 8 to 12, it was, hey, we're going to do really good understanding of writing, English. There was a whole, just like college, we had different semesters. But it was we're going to focus on Shakespeare this semester. We're going to focus on American literature this semester. And so very, very interesting, but very different approach to it.
And would you say, and I guess now we can use some of that questionnaire that I have, the questions from it, and I'm wondering if what we're kind of dancing around right now has something to do with the question of how did they make it? And what I mean by that is, so you're mentioning how each person in your cohort had potentially a different copy of The Great Gatsby.
Yep.
And behind each one of those, I'm sure there was some paperback, some hardcover.
Yep. Some digital.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
So between all of those, I mean, how was each one? We don't have to go through the entire process, but maybe that's even like a why was it made, right? Or why was it made how it was? What does that tell you about the importance of this book in American literature that it has met all of these different forms and is serving all students, not just public, traditional, brick and mortar building type students? I guess the peak of that question is, why so many versions of this book?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
It's a great Gatsby question.
Yeah, it is a great Gatsby question. My mind goes to there's so many different at some point someone said, this is a classic. This is a book that I want to be made throughout the generations, and my mind goes to when was the first time the education system was like, hey, this book is a great book for American literature, and let's start talking about it. And then they remade it. They published it into a virtual copy. They made it into a hardcover. They redid it for the 10th anniversary, or you see the anniversary books, you see the different iterations. My mind goes to at what point did they say, hey, this book is going to be valued in American literature in this story of, as you see, Gatsby and this very much heroic figure in the book, and you see him and his dilemmas that he's facing.
Did you? When you were reading this, you mentioned you read it a couple times afterwards.
I've read it a few times,
So it must have spoke to you in some way. And to say it's a timeless story is inaccurate because it's very much a 20s story.
Yes.
But what are the qualities of it that you feel are timeless and therefore worthy of reading for pleasure, not just for school?
Again, it's a very good question, and I would have to say my mind goes to when you're reading it, and I think this is why it's stuck in American literature for since it got published, and now it's stayed in the system. We're still reading it nowadays. High schoolers are still reading it. But I would say it's the value that you can pull from it. Of it's when you're walking through life, it's not all materialistic. You're not just striving, but there's people behind the eyes that you meet. There's stories that you interact with. And again, there's so much iterations or meaning behind a lot of the book's values. You have the glass eyes, the glasses on the billboard, you have the green light across the bay, you have the relationships at hand, and just the story to unfold. And so I think it really speaks to a lot of these values that we try to implicate in our own lives. There's a lot of this transfer of values. It's as if you're reading other books and you say, hey, I connect with this in this way, and there's so much depth to this that you can almost create values from it. And I think that's a part of why it's stuck for so long and why it's still being read, why people still enjoy it, whether for an educational benefit or just, read it for fun.
Yeah.
So, and why you can read it and get a completely different perspective out of reading it another time.
Yeah, I think everybody connects with, and I was saying this before with my other guests, that The Great Gatsby is, by those of us who know the story very well, we talk about it just by naming the chapter numbers.
Yep.
Chapter 3, chapter 5. We can just kind of say, we can communicate with each other through those different parts. And, it's episodic almost, or, there's ways of looking at it that way. And you can almost, just as you can identify with a particular character,
Yep.
you can also identify with different parts of the book,
Yep.
like those different scenes and that feeling of the past, like when Daisy and Gatsby reunite for the first time. It's palpable. You can feel,
Yes.
and I think
Yep.
everybody's had, even if it wasn't a romantic relationship, just you've had that of like wondering what you've been doing apart from each other, and then when you come back together, being like this like rush of like, I want to catch up with you. I want to, it's like that is so relatable, but particularly in the modern era, this is probably, I always tell my students the 1920s is really the first modern era.
Yep.
That if you were to time travel, which I'm working on, in my garage, if you were to time travel back to the 20s,
Yep.
you'd actually get along okay. You'd probably be familiar with most of what's around there. So this is an artifact from very early in our current modern era. And I like what you said right there about there's a story behind every set of eyes.
Yeah.
That in the pre-World War I era, you could easily live your life within a pretty short proximity from your home, right?
Yes.
That you would know everybody in your life. You would know their story. But once automobiles start showing up, and once life becomes a faster pace and materialistic society and culture, it's so easy for us to overlook or just see people as, well, that's a person that I'll never see again. That's a person I'll never see again. And just kind of not concern yourself. And I mean, so many times in this book, there's lessons of that. Like, not to give it away for listeners, but Daisy and Gatsby kill Myrtle.
Yep.
And they're trying to cover it up. And they're kind of dismissive of it. They're not... realizing that you not only you ended one life, but you ruined another life, and her husband, who's now losing his mind, and he eventually uses that against Gatsby. It's like that connectivity that we have with each other. This is Fitzgerald reminding us, and he's in the opening stages of this new era and recognizing right away that the way the culture is heading has the potential for us to lose our humanity.
Yes.
And here's my warning flag, don't lose it. We're still in that era. We still have that opportunity, unfortunately, to go through our life without understanding or caring what's behind everybody's eyes.
Yeah, and I there's the word that comes to mind that describes that of sonder. So this word is that recognition that someone else is the I'm blanking on the word, but they're the protagonist in their own life. Of like, you're looking at someone else's eyes, and they have this whole set of experiences, this whole life they're living, and now you're looking at from the outside in. And that word's called sonder, and I think it describes your podcast very well, because it's like the everything is a primary source. Like, the people that we interact with have their own set of experiences. They've lived this own life, and I think what encapsulates The Great Gatsby very well is that's what F. Scott Fitzgerald is trying to say, of like, hey, there are people and lives and memories and feelings behind each set of eyes, each person who's worked a job, who's gone through hardship, who has struggled, who's celebrated and mourned, and it's all these things. And so it's like just like the podcast of like, everyone is a primary source. Everyone is living this life, and we often don't take the time to like really take a step back and be like, oh, like, you have a life that you've lived, and starting this podcast, and the work that you've done, and the education and the students' lives that you've impacted, as well as like I've had my own life, and just being in the church and with my large family, going to UNH, being a student in this modern day, wrestling with like this distraction, this fast-paced Western culture of let's go to the next thing. And so, yes.
And so therefore, and thank you for those nice compliments. I
Absolutely.
really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
you just prove once again how relevant this book is.
Yes.
And will probably maintain. I don't imagine much changing in that way, but I'm very glad to know, and you've given me that much more. Yes, there are a lot of us out there.
Yes.
That
Yep.
we are not just ping-ponging our way through life,
Yep.
ignoring each other, and there's a quote from one of the strangest places. Have you ever seen the movie Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it a lot.
It's worth a watch.
Okay.
I think you would like it a lot,
Okay.
for a number of reasons.
Yep.
But it's a time travel-esque story. It's about
Okay.
a young man
Yep.
who's born in 1962 in a bomb shelter, in a fallout shelter.
Interesting.
And so it's kind of comedy, science fiction-y,
Yep.
but then he stays underground with his family for 35 years because they think an atomic bomb has been dropped on LA.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, the nuclear half-life is 35 years. We can't
Yep,
go
yep.
up until the 1990s. And so the movie comes out in 1999, and he brings the sensibilities of shortly after World War II, like that American golden age, 1950s, early 60s with him. And, one of the things, like when he says, like he prays before every meal, and
Yeah.
the people in the 90s are like, what are you doing? But he says, let us always be mindful of the needs of others as part of his prayer. And then another lesson that he teaches, and then it's one of the funniest lines in the movie, one of his new friends that he meets in the 90s, they're like, he said that I am a gentleman. And he's like, I always thought gentlemen had to own horses. But according to Adam, a gentleman is somebody who always puts the comfort of others ahead of himself.
Yeah.
That is always making sure that others are happy and content. Just good hospitality, I guess, or just making sure, those kind of check-ins that we do with each other. It's so easy to see somebody clearly not having a good day and just be like, not my problem. I don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
But that extra effort of going up to them, being like, are you all right? Hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
Yep. Do you need anything? I mean, that kind of empathy, that kind of consideration of others, Fitzgerald knew about it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we all continue with that. And so I think there's a lot of that at this conference, because I think behind this kind of education is a major social emotional component to it. And I'm glad that we were able to talk this out and get more of this.
It's great. I'm someone who loves talking about these things. I'm a huge thinker, philosopher, just like I enjoy these deep conversations and just getting into the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Let's
so
make sure this
it.
isn't the last time we do this.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Absolutely.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything as a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.